Good morning, everyone. The topic of today's presentation is Deep Dish Dungeon, or more precisely, Deep Dish Dungeon's demo. I like playing some demos whenever they pop up on Steam. It feels good to at the very least acknowledge the hard work that many devs, especially indie devs, pour into their games by downloading and playing and testing their games. It feels like the least you can do as long as you have the time. While you are at it, you might even provide some unsolicited feedback like I do in this presentation. And if you stumble over a game you really like and put on your wishlist, all the better. And sometimes demos are a great way to simply test out a game that you're already interested in. Games that you should like based on your previous gaming experience and your expectations for the game. The enjoyment of demos is based on the hope of finding a game that you will enjoy. And so it doubly sucks to play a demo that looks good, that might even be good, while realizing that it is not something that you would enjoy. That is the case for me in regards to Deep Dish Dungeon. As I am discussing a demo here, everything in regards to the game might change in the full release, so don't take this as a review for the finished game once it comes out. Instead, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a bit more broadly about why some mechanics that work in some games do not work in all games. Deep Dish Dungeon is a first-person solo or co-op dungeon exploration and survival game. In the demo, you find yourself in a small but complex maze-like dungeon structure. And I have to say I really like the design of the dungeon, both visually and from a layout perspective. It is easy to get lost, but at the same time you never have to run far to reach any place at all. The lighting system, which provides very little actual light, is a great contributor to getting lost 10 meters next to your sleeping bag. Combine this with a lot of nooks and crannies where loot and crafting materials are hidden, and you have a good basis for exploration. As there is a lot of crafting and even some base building elements, exploration should be rewarding, and it certainly felt that way in the demo. Now there's also risk here. If the dungeon ends up being designed in a very linear fashion, you might have some issues needing to either walk long distances, or you might have to build multiple bases. Neither option would be all that appealing to me, but there are ways to solve this issue, and for now it's pure speculation anyways. The puzzles that are part of the demo are not particularly challenging, but it is also the beginning of the game, so I don't terribly mind. Especially considering that the physics system of some parts of the dungeon, like crates and long planks, could be used to great effect to create some interesting puzzles later on. Now, all of this is generally positive and predicting a fun game. A fun to explore dungeon seems like a really good first ingredient for a successful dungeon exploration game. So what's the problem? Imagine this game to be a cake. The dungeon layout and exploration is the cake base. Important to get right, but ultimately the type and flavor of the cake is going to be decided by filling and topping. Is it an apple cake or a strawberry cake? Is it even a fruit cake at all? You get the point. And in the case of Deep Dish Dungeon, as you might infer from the title and logo of this game, it is about cooking and food. That is the filling of our metaphorical cake, and it is seriously lackluster and bland. Now, take a moment to imagine what a game titled Deep Dish Dungeon might be about. Maybe something like Dungeon Meshi, where you kill various exotic dungeon denizens and make some strange but tasty looking meals out of them. Or maybe it is a hardcore survival focused game, where you have to scour the barren dungeon for scraps of food just to survive, and hunger pushes you to venture deeper and deeper into the dungeon's depths. Deep Dish Dungeon is neither of those, and it does not replace those established ideas with anything interesting that it has cooked up. Let's go into the cooking mechanics in a bit more detail and figure out why they do not work. The most basic level of cooking in Deep Dish Dungeon is to simply roast the individual pieces of food you might find over a fire. Mushrooms, apples, drumsticks, they can all be roasted, or you could make a stew out of them with the help of a cooking pot. The finished meals can then be eaten and provide temporary buffs to health and stamina. There is no hunger or thirst that can kill you, the worst is a dehydration debuff that, to be fair, is quite the problem. But at its core, the food mechanic is about buffing yourself and not about survival. I can easily imagine that later in the game these buffs might be necessary to progress as enemies become more threatening, but as for the demo, that just wasn't the case. There were some more advanced recipes for stuff like pies, but I'm seriously doubting that they will be enough to make me enjoy the cooking systems, as the most basic problems lie in the base ingredients. Most of the stuff you find is incredibly bland. Food items titled apple or mushroom is the kind of stuff you find early on, and that worries me. Mushrooms just being called mushrooms instead of something like cave mushroom or insert fantasy name for a type of mushroom here implies that this is all we're going to get in regards to mushrooms. No variety, no special versions, nothing, just mushrooms. There is just no spice in the types of food that you might encounter. The perfect example of this is when I fought a giant bat. A typical enemy in low-level dungeons in any self-respecting generic fantasy setting, the giant bat would have been the perfect opportunity to introduce some weird food. Maybe their wings can be grilled? Maybe giant bat meat is a bit sinewy, but cook it in a stew and it does wonders for your health? Nothing like that happened in the game. When I beat the giant bat to death with my short sword, it turned into a pair of raw drumsticks. That was the literal name of the item, and putting it into stew, I did not notice any difference to using the raw meat that comes from killing rats. The game is just not taking advantage of the fantasy dungeon setting that it's placed in. At the same time, food is plentiful enough that you're always going to have 2 or 3 buffs running at the same time. It might not necessarily be the best buffs you could have, but they are enough to carry you through combat. And the creation of advanced meals hasn't been particularly satisfying either. You put ingredients into the pot and come back later to a finished stew. Functional, certainly, but neither fun nor interesting. In another game, I might not be so critical of lackluster food mechanics, but if you name your game Deep Dish Dungeon and a good part of your marketing material focuses around cooking and eating, I expect better food mechanics than Minecraft had in 2014. As it is right now, these mechanics are seriously undercooked and need some more time in the oven. And this is a key problem with the game in its current state. Mechanics that might be fine in a different game are not fine in this game, as they do not properly interact with the core gameplay loop of exploration. Instead, the food mechanics in a game called Deep Dish Dungeon feel tacked on, and while games usually can tolerate some tacked on mechanics, it shouldn't be the one you name your game and market your game after. Another pair of issues I have, albeit smaller ones, are the combat and the UI. The UI, while functional, looks very much like a work in progress, and I hope that it gets at least a partial graphical overhaul before the game fully releases. The UI is just noticeable as being a bit raw when compared to the rest of the game's presentation, which is just really good in regards to graphics, sound, and overall atmosphere. The combat is also not great. It feels slow and sluggish, and I either had enough buffs to just overpower any enemy without serious challenge, or I had to chunk them down a bit before retreating, regenerating health and stamina, and re-engaging. Enemy variety also isn't great so far, but to be fair, it is just the beginning of the game. I do have to say that the way some of the skeletons were used was quite clever and effective, even if the enemy itself was a bit boring to fight. As the last thing of note, this review or piece of feedback was based on a single player playthrough of the demo. I sort of feel like the game expects you to play it in co-op with others, so some elements like combat might work better in a group. In conclusion, the game that the demo presents is not a survival nor a cooking game. It is so far a decent dungeon exploration game, but if you're hoping for a challenging survival experience or a food-centric dungeon delve, I would caution you to hold off on buying this game on release and wait for more reviews that discuss these specific aspects. The game has a great base, but lacks some flavor which could be gained by overhauling the food system and replacing it with something more spicy. I don't know if that's a realistic thing to do until fall this year, the planned release date, but I have my hopes that this game might end up being something that I would like to savor, even if that isn't the case right now. Until next time, and remember to study for the test.